All right. We're going to get started here. So, hi, Kathleen. I did start recording already, so you probably had to consent, but. All right, so we're starting a restorative week, last week of the month of October. And I know a lot of you do as well. I always look forward to this week and find a less is more approach to my practice every time. So one simple distinction between the other weeks of the cycle and this week is I feel like in the other weeks of the cycle, we invite contraction, we invite effort, we invite intentional contraction. And this week, I feel like we identify what contraction we already hold and carry in our bodies, and we try to just offset it. So there's not as much of a striving in this practice as there is in other practices. So I just want you to kind of keep that in mind, that your body, the pose, the breath, gravity will kind of do the work for you. And a lot of us already kind of sense that, having practiced for as long as we have. But in this way, we can start to really kind of release tension that lives deeper in the body and deeper in the brain. So we'll start seated, and we're just gonna sit comfortably. And I want you to you might want to take some support to your lap, because we're gonna do a little breathing just to kind of get the nervous system nice and prepared for a quieter practice. So I like to take a little bit of height over my legs so that my hands don't sit as low, so that my elbows feel heavier and then my shoulders feel heavier. I want my shoulders to release. So you might try that as well. And then make sure you're seated on something so you can feel the descent of the thigh bones, that you're feeling really released in the groins and hips. You're not holding your legs up. And I know we don't all have wall space, but it's also a nice way to practice in a restorative week against the wall, so you don't have to work as hard to sit upright. So if that's an option for you, always feel free to use the wall. And then try to lift and spread your chest. And we don't need to lower the chin like we do for pranayama. We're just going to keep the chin really level, neutral with the floor, but close your eyes and look away from your brain. And before we get into the breathing, just try to tap into simultaneously feeling very anchored, connected with the floor, heavy through the kind of the lower half of the body. And then as a result of that, a lightness along the spine, softening the abdomen and the jaw, the face. So we are going to attempt to extend the exhale longer than the inhale. So for some, it's 4-6, that's the ratio, but you might need to trim it down or add beats to that ratio, but just attempting to make your exhale a couple beats longer than your inhale. If, just like any breath work we do, if it becomes agitating or uncomfortable, either stop completely or modify somehow. Remembering that breath work is really to support the nervous system. So if the nervous system is getting triggered, then you want to modify. So begin just noticing a few easy breaths that you're not conditioning at all. And then you're going to start to elongate the in-breath. Same with the out-breath, and extending the out-breath just a bit beyond the length of the in-breath. Qualities of slowness and smoothness are favored over repetitions or how extremely large your ratio is. We'll just do 2 more cycles. When you get through the end of the next lengthened out exhalation, just pick back up with your automatic breathing. Joining the hands together in front of the heart. And on an exhalation, bowing toward your heart. Release your hands. Lift your head and gently open your eyes. Welcome. The first pose is child's pose, and you can set up however you like. You might be more minimal about it. You might add some props to support the chest and belly and head. You might add some support between your buttocks and your heels. Sometimes I like to prop my forehead and my hands. So again, this is really about supporting a quietness in the pose. We'll save the stretching and extending for another practice. Just make sure the knees are nice and wide so that the torso can really come down as low as it's able to. You are going to be in the pose for a couple minutes, so you want to make sure it's feeling good in your body. We really don't want to feel like we're holding ourselves together. We want to be able to surrender. Treating thoughts and sensations as if they're objects in a room, just noticing, maybe noticing your response to certain objects and sensations and thoughts. About halfway through. Remember, the transitions are just as important as the asanas. We're going to come to hands and knees. We're only going to be taking downward dog long enough to bring us up to standing. We have a few standing poses today. So just kind of clear the mat. And then from your hands and knees, extend your legs and walk your feet in. And once you have the feet underneath you, just take hold of your elbows. Let your knees be somewhat bent and let your skull become really heavy. The skull like a prop, a bowling ball, to help your spine decompress. You might circle your chin around or wag the chin from side to side. Sometimes the neck is a little bit stiff here. Drop your hands and find your way up to standing. We're gonna start in a chair downward dog. You might want to put a blanket over the edge of the chair, not for this pose, but for the next couple of poses. Once you have the chair seat kind of in front of you, you can either put your hands over or under the blanket if you did put one on there. Just start to walk yourself back until the trunk kind of comes to an angle. The feet are at least hip distance wide, maybe slightly wider, and the legs are upright. You still might need to keep some bend in your knees. Lengthen the hips away from the wrists and let your head just pass gently through the space of the arms. You don't have to hold your head up. If the shoulders are uncomfortable, sometimes that means your shoulder joints are a little confused. So make sure to really draw the long arm bones, the upper arm bones, into the shoulders, into the trunk, so that your shoulders aren't as confused about what they're supposed to be doing. We'll be here another minute. If you know how many breaths you breathe per minute, that's a nice way to kind of track your time in a pose. I usually have an 11 breath minute, so that's kind of how I keep track for leading us. We're going to come into a chair version of standing forward bend. So just kind of pour your weight into your hands and step closer to the chair. And your feet, again, they're hip distance, maybe a little bit wider. And now you're just going to rest the forearms. Maybe the head can be supported in an easy way, but make sure it's the top of the head, not the forehead. After some time, the head might want to come lower. Just pay attention to your body starting to open. I'm looking at my digital clock through my legs right now. And upside down and backwards, Monday looks like now, which I think is kind of funny. The time is now. We're going to start to just gently come up and transition slowly once you're up to wide standing forward bend. The chair will come in front of us again, but you want your feet wide, so you want to have your mat facing the kind of the wide way. And your toes are pointing forward in front of your heels. And there's a couple ways you can do this. You can keep your head down on the chair, or you could push your chair far out. Your arms are stretched out, kind of like a downward dog, and let your head just pass through the arms. So you just want to kind of sense your way into which feels best in your body. This is another one where if you have wall access, having the buttocks up against the wall can be really soothing, very quieting. There's not as much of a emphasis on supporting your legs there. But do make sure that your feet are balanced. Make sure you have as much weight in the ball mounds as you do in the heels. And even though there's effort, we're dialing down the effort. So you're really kind of minimizing how much effort you need. You're kind of perfecting the pose in that way. Notice where there's gripping, resistance. Attention and breath can oftentimes release these areas. Start to gently come up, so you can start to move your head up away from the floor. We're going to be moving to the floor, so if you feel like just kneeling down instead of coming up, you can do that. We're going to keep working with the chair, and we'll do a couple of seated forward bends. So setting up your supports for Upavishta Konasana, which is the wide seated forward bend. You're going to sit on that triangle of blanket. And you can make it as thick as you want. You can stack two triangles. It's the corner of a blanket. And we put it directly under the tailbone. And the sitting bones do not get that corner. So it's really literally, you're right on the very tip of the blanket with the tailbone. So we have this little three-pronged connection to the floor, the tailbone, the sitting bones. We want the sitting bones down, the tailbone getting that boost up, which is going to kind of shuttle up the spine, keep the spine feeling tall. Taking the legs wide. And then aligning your hip rotation. So it looks like your toes are above your heels. So some of us have to correct differently for that. And then we'll come into the centered position first, and we'll go to the side. So you're going to just bring the chair as close as you need. Rest your head, and sometimes the prayer position, so you're resting the elbows and the forehead to the thumbs, can be a nice beginning position if you want to start there and maybe eventually go lower. So we keep the dial kind of on a simmer with the legs. We keep the legs somewhat active. If we didn't have that, the pose would be very dull. So as BKS Iyengar said, we have to prick the consciousness awake. But then we're really trying to dial down with as much as we can. After some time, you might sense you're ready to come a little bit lower with the head, with the torso. You can always push your chair forward. You can drop the hands lower. Notice areas of deeper sensation, maybe the groins, maybe the hips, maybe across the lower back. Maybe there's tension in your jaw or shoulders, calf muscles, hamstrings. Remember, attention and breath are really kind of the key to starting to release some of the tension. I'm going to come up just so we can transition to Upavishta Konasana, Parshva Upavishta Konasana. So we're going to be moving to each side. So you'll carry your chair and just place it over your right leg. And then sitting upright, just kind of use the surface of the chair to help you turn your torso to rotate so that your breastbone is more aligned with your right leg. And then again, you might start on the elbows, propping your head that way and just kind of initiating yourself into the pose. You might be able to come lower since we've already done the centered version. And now in this side of the pose, we're keeping the left leg really kind of alert. The left leg is really our anchor point. So strong enough left leg, not overly so, of course. And that continuous, gentle steering of the torso to the right. Remember, you can always slide your chair farther out if you're ready to go deeper. It's just as important not to be underwhelmed in your poses as it is to be overwhelmed, not to be overwhelmed. Maybe the left lower back is giving more sensation now. We're going to start to gently come up and quietly transition to the other side. Place your chair over the left leg. Use the surface of the chair to just gently help you turn your torso, turn your spine. And when you're as lined up with your left leg as you can be, and find that starting position, make sure the head is supported somehow. Engaging the right leg with a little more intention, gently turning the trunk from the right to the left, but then quieting down as much as you can. Maybe the right inner thigh is talking to you, maybe the lower back, the groin, maybe somewhere else in your body. Maybe sliding the chair out a little bit beyond where you are now for the last few breaths. On an in-breath, just slowly making your way up. The last forward bend we're going to do is Paschimottanasana, Western facing forward bend. And we want to sit on the edge of the blanket. And again, make sure you have enough height. So it might be 2 blankets, might be a doubled up, folded blanket. But ample height, again, is going to be supportive to keeping your lumbar spine less rounded. And then the chair will go over the legs. And so the legs work a little bit here. Again, they kind of keep us awake in this pose so we don't feel like a rag doll made out of cotton. So you want a little flexion with the feet, you want a little pressure with the legs, but not your most powerful leg position that you can do, just kind of enough. We want to just do enough. And then your starting position with your head support. So again, it might be the prayer position. You might be stacking forearms or fists. There's not really a wrong way to do it as long as the forehead gets some support. And you're tracking with your own physical edge. So as you start to get that inner signal that the body wants to go deeper, then you're just going to abide and maybe push the chair forward, maybe lower the arms. So the fascia, the connective tissue, is addressed when we do restorative practice. I oftentimes think about the image of twisting a shirt, twist it at the middle, kind of like you do a tie-dye. And if one area of the fascia is tight, the entire system, the network of the fascia throughout the body is tight. So with every breath, just kind of envisioning a loosening of the tension we've accumulated in our connective tissue, that kind of outermost layer. Maybe using the in-breath as an image to expand throughout the body, to release the tension that's kind of default setting, sitting there in the body. And now we're going to gently start to come up. So use an in-breath. And relax your legs from the effort they were holding. The chair can be put aside until later. We're going to do a mild back bend Paryanukasana. So your choice to use 2 blocks or a bolster and a block, or a rolled blanket and another blanket or a block. So there's really no wrong propping. We're trying to elevate behind the chest and we want something for the head. So the bolster might be too much. You have to kind of Goldilocks this. A rolled blanket would be a good substitute if the bolster feels like too much. And we're going to do the pose with cross-legged position. So start with either leg crossing front. We'll switch, and halfway through the pose, we'll switch to the other cross-legged position. And you're going to try to arrive with the first prop just behind the sternum, so across the shoulder blade line. And then the head support, we're not trying to do anything more than align the chin and forehead. So it's the neutral position. So in other words, we're not trying to tilt the chin down toward the chest in this one. And then of course, if you notice your hips need some support, if your legs are kind of gripping to be here, you want to add some blankets or blocks under the knees or thighs. So we've been in a series of forward bends. So we're just kind of starting to cleanse the palate of the forward bends. Start to feel a spreading and a lift to the chest. Make sure your palms are turned up so that the shoulders can really rotate toward the floor, external rotation. Make sure the lumbar spine is long. You might have to pull the buttocks away from the end of your upper body. And even here, where we're pretty passive, you really want to scan your body for the resistances. Maybe it's where you're touching the floor. Maybe there's some hardness in the abdomen or face, the jaw, maybe the throat. You're going to gently change the crossing of your legs. Do one more minute here. So moving through those resistances, like breaking through layers of an onion, tension layers. So in the other weeks of the month, we invite contraction, and this week we excuse contraction from the body. We're going to start to leave the pose. Just bring the soles of the feet to the floor and gently, carefully roll to your side. And we're going to use a similar prop as we did for Baddha Konasana for the region of the shoulder blades. But if you were using a block, that's probably not going to be as good as either a bolster or a rolled blanket. So either roll a blanket up or use your bolster. We're going to do Baddha Konasana, bound angle, reclining. We still need something for head support. So you might have a blanket ready. And we're going to join the feet. We don't need a strap. We're just going to keep the feet together and the knees open wide. And if you have, again, tension in your hips or groins, make sure to wedge something under your thighs or knees so that your legs can really surrender. And then you're going to try to recline back over that rolled blanket or bolster so that you are targeting the area directly behind the sternum. You're lifting the sternum. The arms open wide, the palms are face up. And then rock your head a little bit to kind of snuggle the back of the neck toward the floor. So sometimes in this pose, I use the image of a fountain head. The sternum rises first part of the in-breath, and second part, it expands. You can kind of envision a fountain shooting up, but also that big canopy that spreads out wide at the peak of the breath. Keeping your eyes looking toward your cheeks. Maybe the inner thighs are like tight guitar strings. And every time you exhale, they become a little bit looser. Try to smooth out between your eyebrows and unhinge your jaw. There's a saying, who are you when there isn't a problem? And I like to think about that saying, but also who are you when you're not tight with tension? We have no idea how much influence our physical tension plays out as mental tension until we start to address it. Just a couple more breaths. We'll just start to move the legs into the counter shape of knees together, feet wide. So use your fingertips to join the knees. Step the feet out to the edges of the mat. Fold the hands in onto your belly. Without disturbing the brain more than is necessary, transition to either side. We're going to set up for Parivrtta Padangusthasana, so the revolving hand to big toe pose without a strap, but we want to support the leg going to the side. So you might use a couple blankets, you might just use your blocks, bolster, anything is fine. What's important is the height is adequate. So you might not know yet, of course, so just have things ready to go. This is a reclining pose, so you might want the head support of a blanket. And because I've started with my props off to the left, I'm going to ask you to do the same. And we're going to be moving the right leg in a moment to those props. So it's actually going to be the knee. We're going to keep the knees bent. So go ahead and come onto your back. Both feet are on the floor, knees are bent. Head is supported, again, just for neutral. So chin and forehead even. Take your hands over your right shin or behind the right thigh. Take a few breaths, just kind of hugging the thigh closer to the chest. And then like you're rolling over in your bed, you're just going to kind of roll over so that your left hip is under, your right hip is above the left, and prop that right knee onto whatever you've set up. Make sure it's enough. Make sure it's high enough. Attempt to put your knee in line with your hip. The pose gets deeper the closer the knee comes to the shoulder line. So just know that you can take the knee higher if it's available to you. And then you're going to just gently let your right shoulder drape heavily back toward the floor. So the hips are stacked, but the shoulders are trying to be level with the floor again, not stacked. You might eventually unfold your right arm completely out to the side, perpendicular from the torso, palm up. And you might include the head rolling toward the right side, or maybe just looking up toward the ceiling. To deepen this, if it's too mild, you'll straighten your left leg, and you might eventually straighten the right leg. You might have to hold your right leg to support it from kind of floating away from you. But do your best to really power down. We don't need to do much with the effort dial here. Once you've set it up, you should be pretty surrendered in your body. And the more surrendered you can make your legs, the juicier that twist will be for your spine. Every time you exhale, imagine the outer right ribs rolling back toward the floor. Gently start to come out. So if your leg was straight, start to bend the right knee, bend the left knee, slide the sole of the left foot to the floor, uncross your legs, come back to center, and take a moment to lengthen your torso, your shoulders, your skull, your hips. Everything is back in line. You can move the props to the right. And once you have the props placed, hugging the left leg in, either grabbing behind the thigh, underneath the thigh, or over the shin. Just a few exhales, just kind of massaging that kind of deep hip flexion. And then begin to roll that right hip to the floor, left hip above, prop the inner left knee on the props you've set up. You might use your right hand to kind of keep the leg in place where you've arrived at, and then try to let the left shoulder come back down to the floor. Maybe starting with the hand over the side ribs, maybe all ready to stretch the arm open wide. Your head rolling to the left. And again, if you need more, you can try to straighten out the legs. You might invite the left knee toward the shoulder line. And then do your best to completely surrender all effort from the body. Letting those left side ribs float back toward the floor every time you exhale. And 3 more exhalations. When you're coming through the end of the next exhalation, you start to find your way to placing the right foot on the floor, rolling back to your back body, uncrossing your legs. Take a moment to lift the hips, stretch the spine long, spread the shoulders, align the skull with the torso. And then easing over to one side. So just 2 more poses before we come into pranayama. We're going to do a bridge pose with block support and extending the legs. So just 1 block is needed. Make your way onto your back once your mat is clear and you have no blanket under your head for bridge pose. And you're either gonna put the low setting of the horizontal block under the sacrum. You might be fine with the medium setting, but this is not your, this is not the time to do your most extreme possible back bend. And just start with your shins vertical, your feet grounded, make sure your feet are as wide as your hips and your toes are in front of your heels. Try to rock the shoulders slightly, kind of tuck the shoulder blades up toward the chest and bring the outer upper arms down. The palms are up. Rock your head until your chin kind of snuggles down toward the little pocket between your collarbones. And every time you breathe in, just inviting the breastbone to rise. And when you exhale, attempt to keep the breastbone nice and high. Don't let it sink down with the breath. Looking toward your cheeks. Make sure to take the tailbone toward the ceiling. So it's as if you're flattening the lumbar curve into the block. So you might stay here. You might extend your legs one at a time. Keep the feet hip distance, put the toes right above the heels. So just turning the effort dial up a little bit, but watch for hardness creeping in. We want to keep the face soft, the cheeks soft, the gaze lowered, the breastbone lifted. Smoothing out the forehead and the brow line. And if you did extend the legs, come back to bending the knees. And then pressing into the feet, lifting the hips enough that you can take your block out from under you. Draw the legs in. Gentle reclining child's pose. We're going to use the chair one more time for legs up the wall pose with the chair. So once your feet come back down, roll to your side. Put the chair back on your mat. And also we're going to use one blanket folded in half. So the thicker blanket folded in half. And it's going to go under the sacrum. And then you might also need something under your head. So we're going to try to put our lower legs on the chair seat, the sacrum on the blanket, and again, maybe something under the head for legs up the wall pose. Viparita Karani, reverse process. And the legs have to be in no particular shape. So just whatever happens, your knees are probably wide. You're probably in a very obtuse kind of looking bound angle pose for most people. And then arms open wide, just like Shavasana, not perpendicular, just about 45 degrees, palms up. And we'll be here a couple minutes. Zero effort, hopefully. Observing how the breath is really conducive to the extension of your exhalation. If you know Ujjayi Pranayama, just applying the Ujjayi to the exhalations, just to kind of paint the exhale with a layer of sound, another layer for the senses. Imagine your belly sinking into the pelvic bowl each time you exhale. Start to come back to easy breathing if you did go into Ujjayi out breath. We're going to start to draw the legs away from the chair. Find a way to come off the height. You can roll to your side once your legs are off the chair. And there's lots of ways to set up for pranayama. Today, I'm just going to introduce the rolled blanket technique. If you don't have, it's kind of quicker. So, I mean, not that you want to be in a rush when you're doing pranayama, but to roll a blanket, this is as opposed to setting up that kind of tiered blanket system. So you have this long roll. You don't need all that for your torso. So the top part you can kind of leave and you can turn it into, I call it a snail shell. You can kind of roll it up under the head so that the chin and chest come together. So remember, you will get cooler as you lie here passively. So you might put a blanket over you. We don't wear any glasses for pranayama or shavasana, so put them in a safe place off to the side. And then we also don't want to be touching our stuff. That can kind of keep us distracted. So moving things outside of your reach, away from your reach. So you're going to come onto the roll. Let it kind of start where your rib cage begins. So we don't need anything under the lumbar spine, definitely not under the sacrum or the buttocks. And then you're going to, again, take the top part of that roll and just kind of build it up under the head so that you get the chin and chest connection that we really try to create in pranayama. And the blanket roll should just really be primarily behind the spine so that you feel this kind of draping effect around the contour of that. Make sure the buttocks are pulled away from the trunk. There isn't any tension in the lumbar spine. Use an eye pillow if you have trouble keeping your eyes closed. If it causes agitation or effort, use an eye pillow. Even a strap tail is fine. We're going to work with Viloma breath today, which is the interrupted breathing technique. And there's the Viloma inhale and there's a Viloma exhale. So we're going to begin with the interrupted inhalation. The image I like to use is riding a gondola. So the in-breath is going to be up the gondola, the chairlift. And if you've ever been on a chairlift, oftentimes it stops and starts. So just thinking about the gondola smoothly moving up, and then we're going to pause. It moves up again, pause, and then it moves up and gets to the top. Exhale smoothly down, like you didn't get off the chairlift. Smoothly down, all the way down, no stops. You might be able to proceed into the next round. You might need to do an easy breath in and out. So you really have to self-guide. Notice if the brain is getting irritated, if the breath is getting foreign or agitating, all those things. We want to just kind of come back to easy breathing. So we'll do 3 rounds of that Viloma inhale, the interrupted inhale, the smooth, easy exhalation. You always want to start any practices after a complete inhale, exhale. And begin when you're ready. 2 pauses, 3 segments of in-breath. And when you've made those attempts, just sit with easy breathing for a few moments. Working with in-breath is more upregulating, it's energizing, it can be mood lifting. So I usually like to start with that and finish with the down-regulating pranayama. So in a moment, we'll test out the Viloma exhalation. Very same idea, just we're going to work with interrupting the out breath. So again, 3 segments, 2 pauses. We're going to inhale, exhale fully. We're going to inhale a smooth up the gondola ride, 1 easy in breath. And then exhale, 3 segments, 2 pauses. Trying it 3 times on your own. The pauses are very brief. Try not to harden the abdomen when you're pausing. Whenever you've come through those 3 attempts, sit with your easy breathing. Transitioning as quietly as you can to remove the rolled blanket from under your spine, to letting your torso come down against the floor. You might take something minimal under the head. Coming right into Shavasana. So we've used the senses essentially to transcend the senses. So now we're letting the sense organs withdraw from the outer world. Whenever any of the senses is impaired, it becomes a gateway to infinity, whether by deprivation, injury, or age. Obstruction of the senses invites awareness of soul. The mind can no longer take the world for granted. Attention spirals inward and touches the glistening emptiness, the reality behind appearance. I welcome you to stay as long as you like. And if you'd like to close as a group, feel free to start to invite some deeper breaths. Very simple movement begins to trickle in through your fingers, toes. The head can gently start to rock from side to side. Maybe squeezing your toes and your fingers. Moving your hands onto your chest or belly. And sliding the soles of the feet to the floor by bending your knees. As gently as you can, making your way to one side. Gently moving to seated from side lying. And when you find yourself there, joining the hands together in front of the heart. Lifting the corners of the mouth, inviting a sense of gratitude. Let's breathe in through the nose. Let that breath go. From the place within me that I know to be divine, I honor that place within each of you. Namaste. Thank you all. Have a great day. And I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye.